You're working harder than ever, yet you feel like you're hitting a wall by 2 p.m. every single day. And the cruel part? You're not distracted. You're not slacking. You're doing everything you were told makes someone successful. Long hours, relentless focus, powering through the fatigue. But burnout isn't caused by your workload. It's caused by how you manage your recovery. In this video, we're breaking down the science of micro-recovery cycles and how a simple 2-minute shift can reset your brain instantly. Stay with me, because what you learn here might completely change how you approach every single workday from this point forward. Let's start with a question most people have never thought to ask. When did rest become something you had to earn? Somewhere in the last decade, the narrative around productivity mutated. We went from celebrating output to glorifying input. How early you woke up, how many hours you logged, how little sleep you survived on. In 2026, with smartphones pinging every 4 minutes, AI assistants monitoring your workflow, and remote work dissolving the boundary between your office and your bedroom, we have built an environment that is fundamentally incompatible with how the human brain actually operates. The 9-to-5 model was already a blunt instrument. Now it's being stretched and compressed into a 7-to-9, and our biology is silently absorbing the damage. Here's what no productivity guru is telling you. Every time you push through a moment of mental fatigue without recovering, not the dramatic exhaustion, just the mild, I'll be fine tiredness, you leave behind something researchers call cognitive residue. It's the neurological equivalent of leaving 100 browser tabs open. Each one is individually small. Collectively, they slow everything down. Your decision-making gets hazier. Your emotional regulation starts to fray. You become more reactive, less creative, and increasingly dependent on stimulants just to feel baseline functional. And the real tragedy is that most people attribute this to a character flaw, a lack of discipline, a lack of willpower, when what they're actually experiencing is a physiological system running on empty because it was never given the chance to recover. This is where micro-recovery cycles come in. Think of them not as a productivity hack, not as a wellness trend, but as an essential software update for the human brain. And the update only takes 2 minutes to install. To understand why 2 minutes works, you need to understand something called the ultradian rhythm. Most people have heard of the circadian rhythm, the 24-hour cycle that governs when you sleep and when you wake. But the brain runs a second, less talked about loop inside that cycle. Roughly every 90 minutes, your brain transitions from a high-focus, high-performance state into what neuroscientists call a rest phase, a natural trough where the system is craving a brief physiological reset. Your body signals this with subtle but real cues: restlessness, difficulty concentrating, a creeping desire to do anything other than what you're doing. Most of us override these signals with coffee, willpower, or sheer panic about our to-do lists. And every time we do, we borrow focus from a future version of ourselves that can't afford to pay it back. Now here's where the science gets fascinating. When you intentionally silence the sympathetic nervous system, the part of your biology running the stress response, cortisol levels drop measurably within minutes, not hours, minutes. The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center and the engine behind anxiety and overwhelm, begins to de-escalate. Blood pressure decreases. The prefrontal cortex, where your most sophisticated thinking lives, gets the oxygen and glucose delivery it needs to fire at full capacity again. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable neurochemistry happening in real time inside your brain during a properly executed 2-minute break. The problem is that most of the breaks we take aren't actually breaks. They're task switches disguised as rest. You close the spreadsheet and open Twitter. You step away from the email and immediately text someone about a problem at work. You watch a 60-second video that triggers a dopamine hit followed by a cortisol spike because the algorithm just showed you something outrage-inducing. your brain never actually left the building. The sympathetic nervous system stayed on. The cognitive residue kept accumulating. And you walk back to your desk feeling, somehow, more tired than when you left. True sensory disconnection is a completely different experience. And the research backs this up with striking clarity. Studies on attention restoration show that even 90 to 120 seconds of genuine perceptual disengagement, not passive consumption, actual stillness, can produce measurable improvements in executive function and emotional regulation. The sweet spot, the threshold that resets the amygdala without pulling you out of workflow momentum, is right around 120 seconds. 2 minutes. That's the number. Not 20, not even 10, just 2. So what does a real micro-recovery cycle look like? Researchers and high-performance coaches have identified what's sometimes called the 3-window approach. The first window is a visual reset. Instead of looking at a screen, you let your gaze soften and expand, looking toward a distant wall, a window, or simply closing your eyes. The focused, narrow visual attention you use when reading or working keeps the brain in a high alert state. Broadening your gaze physiologically signals safety to the nervous system. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but the optic nerve is directly wired to the stress response, and relaxing it is one of the fastest ways to begin down-regulating anxiety. The second window is controlled breathing, not deep breathing in the performative, overly complex sense, just a deliberate exhale that's longer than your inhale. The exhale is where the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest system, gets activated. A double inhale through the nose, followed by a slow, full exhale through the mouth, sometimes called a physiological sigh, has been shown in Stanford research to produce the fastest reduction in acute stress of any known breathing technique. You can do this at your desk, in a meeting hallway, in your car. It requires no app and no equipment. The third window is a postural shift. Stand up, roll your shoulders, change your physical orientation in space. The body and brain are not separate systems, they are one system. The proprioceptive signals your brain receives from your posture directly influence your cognitive and emotional state. Sitting compressed and still for 90 minutes communicates stress and stagnation. Moving, even briefly, communicates recovery and readiness. Now let's talk about the thing nobody wants to name. Productivity guilt. You know exactly what this is. It's that low-grade anxiety that creeps in the moment you stop doing something measurable. The feeling that if you're not producing, you're falling behind. That rest is a reward you haven't yet earned. And this mindset, this deeply ingrained cultural script, is precisely the mechanism that leads to the 3 p.m. energy crash. Because what productivity guilt does is convince you to skip the 2-minute reset at 90 minutes, so that by 150 minutes, you're running on cognitive fumes, making slower decisions, writing weaker work, and eventually arriving at mid-afternoon so depleted that no amount of caffeine can simulate genuine mental clarity. The data here is unambiguous. Studies on knowledge workers consistently show that output quality, not just quantity, but quality, is significantly higher when short recovery intervals are incorporated throughout the day. The people pausing are not falling behind. They are outperforming the people grinding through. Not because rest is magical, but because sustained high-quality focus is only possible when it is periodically renewed. Rest isn't the reward for hard work. Rest is the mechanism that makes hard work sustainable. This changes everything when you zoom out, because the micro-recovery cycle is not just a daily tool, it's a long-term investment. Cortisol, when chronically elevated, doesn't just make you tired. It degrades hippocampal function, impairing memory formation. It suppresses immune response. It accelerates cellular aging. The people who never learn to recover in 2-minute windows are the people who, 5 years from now, will be staring at a doctor who tells them their body finally stopped absorbing what their schedule was demanding. But here's the other side of that story. The people who do build these cycles in, who treat the 90-minute mark like a calendar appointment, who protect those 120 seconds with the same seriousness they protect a client meeting, those people build a compounding resilience. Their baseline stress levels lower month over month. Their sleep quality improves because their cortisol curve normalizes. Their creativity expands because their default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for insight and imagination, gets regular airtime throughout the day instead of being perpetually suppressed. In 2026, you have the tools to make this automatic. Calendar blockers, AI workflow managers, focus timers, the infrastructure to protect your recovery windows is already in your hands. The question was never whether the tools existed. The question was whether you believed the recovery was worth protecting. So here's the challenge. Today, not next Monday, not after the deadline, today, set a timer for 90 minutes. When it goes off, stop. Not to check your phone, not to pivot to another task. Stop. Look somewhere soft and far. Breathe out slowly. Stand up for a moment. Let 120 seconds pass in actual stillness. And then notice what happens when you sit back down. Because the shift you feel won't be subtle. And once you feel it once, you will never go back to powering through. You weren't designed to be always on. You were designed to oscillate. Start working with your biology instead of against it, and watch what happens to your life.